Normalization is a digital signal processing function that's available in just about all audio editors. What it does is it scans through the program material looking for the highest level, and if that level doesn't reach the maximum available dynamic range, the software boosts the overall signal so that the peak hits the highest level possible. We'll look at that in a minute using the two different forms of normalization, one being peak and the other one RMS. I'll get onto that in a minute. So what we need to do in this instance is determine the highest peak values. And an easy way of doing this is when you play the audio, you just keep an eye on the metering. So let's try it with this drum loop that I've loaded up. As you can see, we're peaking just under 7 dB, so it's about minus 6.9 dB, and that's below zero obviously. And you can see that the peak values, just graphically, they're quite low anyway. So what we want to do is normalize this to bring it as close to 0 dB as we can. Let me stop that for a second. What I tend to do is some normalization functions will normalize to 0 dB, but some audio editors, and to be honest, I think most of them nowadays, you can adjust how much you want it normalized, either by dB or by percentage. So let's have a look at SoundForge's Normalize tool, which is under the Process menu, Normalize. We can select the peak or the average, and we can select the amount either by dB or by percentage. So what I'm going to do is pick a small value like this, like a minus 0.63 dB. This is below zero obviously, and what we'll do is we'll do a peak normalize, and you can see what's happening. In fact, sometimes what's good to do here is to preview the audio file with these settings and keep an eye on the metering, and that should go just below the values that we've got here. So we should see that at minus 0.6 below zero. So just have a look. You can see we're pretty much there because the value is between 0.6 and 0.7. So let's stop that, or rather let's just process it, render it. So you'll see what's happened here. All the peak levels have been raised, and what happens to the audio when you're using the peak function is that everything is raised by the amount that we select, referencing to this peak value. So every piece of peak value within this audio, and if you were to zoom in, you'd see that there's loads, as you can see there, is normalized by referencing to the highest peak value. So if this goes up 1 dB, all the other bits will go up 1 dB. One thing to be wary of when you are normalizing and you've got, say, an audio file that's very low in gain value, whenever you normalize an audio file, you invariably raise the noise floor because everything is raised by that amount referencing to the peak value. So the noise floor will come up as well. And if you've got poorly recorded material that's very low in gain and it's got a noisy background, maybe hiss, etc., all that will be normalized along with the audio itself. Now let's undo that and try the RMS value. Now what RMS stands for is root mean square, and basically the process is that it's now, instead of looking for just high peak values, it's picking an average. So it's looking through the audio data and picking average values. Once it's found the average value, it uses that average value as the referencing for the normalizing. You'll see this once we do this. Now if I preview this, you can already hear the huge difference compared to peak. Now if I render this, just by looking at the graphic data here, you can see what's happened. This has boosted all the average levels, so you're not going to get things that are relative to the peak value. You're going to get things that are relative to the average value. This can work for certain material and peak works for other material. You always need to be conscious of the kind of material that you're processing. Peak is generally the default to use, simply because you're trying to raise values referencing to the highest value that's available in the audio data. But there are times when RMS can work quite well. I mean, I've used RMS on strings or vocals or slower flowing data, and it's come out quite fine. So what you need to do is not just listen. Try and look at your data as well and see what it's done to it. You can't get a simpler process than normalization. But what you can do is think about where you're going to use it. If you're working in a linear non-floating point digital system, you'll get sort of rounding off errors simply because of the nature of not having a a floating point system. What that basically means is that because you're rounding off the errors, you're going to end up with either metallic sounding data or things that sound a bit fuzzy. However, just to put that in perspective, almost all systems now have floating points, so really that doesn't come into it too much. But what is important is to remember where to use this. I tend to use this right at the end of the signal path, so be wary where you're using. Sound designers will tend to use normalization a lot when they're sampling instruments, etc., just to bring the levels up relative to the high peak values, so that then they can use that data. That's pretty much it with normalization. But as I say, use your ears, use your eyes, and be sensible about where you're using it.